Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Sylvain Neuvel in conversation with James Rollins, discussing a history of what comes next. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is tomorrow, Thursday, February 18th at 6 p.m. with Julia Kay in conversation with Shannon Wolf, discussing My Life in Transition, a super late bloomer collection. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter, which you can do on our website. To submit a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like our speakers to answer, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask questions. Also, support our local bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured books. Pardon me. Just click on the green purchase button that reads A History of What Comes Next directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. We're also selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Kobo for those who are interested. So a little more about Sylvain Neuvel. Sylvain is a Canadian science fiction writer known as the author of the Themis Files. The Themis Files include Sleeping Giants, Waking Gods, and Only Human. He was educated at the University of Montreal and the University of Chicago and runs his own professional translation agency. He's also the author of the dystopian novel, The Test. A little more about James Rollins. James Rollins is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of international thrillers. His writing has been translated into more than 40 languages and has sold more than 20 million books. The New York Times says, Rollins is what you might wind up with if you toss Michael Crichton and Dan Brown into a particle accelerator. Very interesting. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Sylvain and James. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you to Book Soup for having me. And thank you, James, so much for doing this. This is a lot of work. I've done it, and I appreciate it so much.
I just do it just so I get a free copies of books. So I said, a free copy of your latest book, and I'm happy to do so.
Oh, I'll start with the disclaimer. I see things going on in the sidebar. I need new glasses, so I really can't see anything unless I go like this. So I salute you all, and I'm glad you're there, but I can't see a single word you're writing right now.
Well, I'll say that Patrick asked a question about whether the copies, this is in the sidebar, whether the copies are signed or is it an added page or book plate. I'll leave that question for Maggie to answer in the sidebar, and I'm going to ask you some questions because I've never met you before. We had a conversation before in the green room before we came on about Hollywood, about the pain and angst of trying to deal with Hollywood and books. But I don't know much more else about you, so this is my chance to try to find out more about you as an author and as a person. But before we jump right into talking about a history of what comes next, I'm one of those people that whenever I took a multiple, you ever take the SATs, they always say, if you have a problem with one of the questions, skip it and go on. I could never do that. I had to solve that problem before I could move on. So I've got to do everything chronologically. So I'm going to sort of start from the beginning of your career and work towards a history of what comes next.
Awesome.
So let's start from basically what Maggie sort of hinted at, that you had sort of an eclectic job career before becoming a writer. I read your bio. You were a journalist. You worked in soil decontamination. You sold ice cream in California. You peddled furniture across Canada. And of course, as you mentioned, you taught linguistics, and now you have you're a certified translator. So what got you to start writing? What was the impetus to get you to start writing that first book?
Well, I've been writing things all my life in one form or another. I wrote fiction, but for the fun of it. I wrote short stories. I never even thought about doing anything about them, but I worked as a journalist. I wrote training manuals. I found ways to write, whether they paid or not, pretty much all my life. My first book, Sleeping Giants, I wrote mostly at the beginning, at least for the fun of it. I'd asked my son, he was 3 back then, if he wanted me to build him a toy robot, because I like to build stuff. And he, instead of just saying, "Oh, yes, please, Dad," my son's always makes things a little more complicated. So he started asking a bunch of questions, like, what kind of robot? What does it do? Does it fly? Does it have pilots? And so he wanted a story to go with it. And I sort of let it simmer for a few days. And eventually I came up with this question, like, what would happen if we found some gigantic alien artifact buried somewhere? And the answer came with it. I thought we wouldn't know about it. It would be like some top secret project. But I thought, but it would leave a trace of sorts. Like there'd be reports, there'd be something. And I thought maybe I could write that trace. And I started writing on my iPhone after my kid went to bed. Did that every night. About midway through, I reread the whole thing and I thought, that's pretty good. I think I'll port it to the computer and type on the keyboard. So I finished that. And I thought, I think good job. I was fine with it, but I really wanted to write the sequel. So I figured I'm gonna get this published. So I queried like 55 agents, I think. They all turned me down, and I thought, what the hell? I'll self-publish. I'll sell 40 copies, and I can write the second book for those 40 people. It'll be fun. But I'm also a little bit obsessed with things, and I can't let things go. So I wanted it to look professional. So I got a cover design, and I wanted a quote on the top right corner. It had some review of sorts. So I sent the manuscript to some magazines, and Kirkus Reviews came back with a glowing praise. And they put the thing online like maybe 5 months before my little self-published book was supposed to come out. And I started getting calls from Hollywood producers, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And one of them called me back and said, I want to help you. And Hollywood producer who says, I want to help you is like, I don't know, it sounded funny. So I thought, all right. He said, you need an agent, a book agent, so a movie agent. So I thought, all right. He said, I know this guy at Creative Artists Agency. I trust him with my sons. Great guy. So I talked to the guy at CA, and he says, I love your book. I'd like to represent it. I said, what do I do? He said, well, if you say yes, I'm your agent. And he found me a book agent in New York. We went through the same process. Love your book. What do I do? You say yes. All right. Then I had a book agent. And within about a month, we sold movie rights to Sony. They talked about it, which really helped at the book end of things. And I had a 3-book deal with Del Rey for the Themis Files. Craziest month of my life. It was just insane.
So you started with writing on an iPhone. That's got to be challenging to work on an iPhone.
Not if you don't care about typos and things. Like when I put that thing in the computer, it was horrible. It took like about 3 weeks to just get it to look like something. But
well, I can relate to the process of being rejected. Similar to you, I was trying to find an agent for my first book, and I was rejected by 50 different agents. It was my 50th agent who saw something in that first book of mine to seek publication. And oddly enough, one of my first publishers, the first book that ever got published was with Del Rey Books, and now I'm with Tor, similar to you. So apparently, we're following each other's footsteps in some arcade way.
Oh, I hope we are.
But how was it? Now, again, I know from my own personal experience, it took a while to get 50 rejections. One of them was kind enough to send me a personal note on the form rejection letter, just 3 words: "This is unpublishable." So I can relate to the sting of how did you manage to go through 50 rejections without tearing your hair out and giving up on the project and saying, okay, this is never going to happen?
Well, I didn't get 50 rejections. Like I think 12 of them replied out of 55. The other ones just never answered.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you get some form emails with your name copy pasted in a different font. Once in a while, you get a more personal one with usually thinking I'm a woman, calling me Sylvia or something. But it went pretty fast. I'd given myself like a window. And when I realized that this was not going to be, because you imagine a process where people reply fairly quickly and give you feedback, and you grow out of the experience. And when I realized fairly quickly that this was not going to happen, I had sort of set my mind on self-publishing. I had stopped really caring and waiting for those replies, because it wasn't what I expected. So when even when Hollywood came calling, even after we sold the rights to Sony, I was still absolutely convinced I was self-publishing that book.
Well, it's a great route. I mean, a lot of people have a great success with self-publishing. I mean, The Martian was self-published initially before it was picked up by a mainstream publisher. But let's talk about that book that was rejected by 50 different agents. I mean, basically, NPR said it's one of the most promising series kickoffs in recent memory. And that Kirkus review we were just talking about, just to pull a quote from it, masterfully blends together elements of sci-fi, political thriller, and apocalyptic fiction. Great reviews, which is always sort of mystifying why you can garner that type of review, but can be rejected by 50 different agents. That's still always a mystery. It just sort of tells you how high of a hurdle it is to get that first book, published. Is that you can write such a great book as NPR and Kirkus will advocate, but you can't find a home for it. So, which leads to my next question is, again, going off of what Kirkus described the book as, sci-fi, political thriller, apocalyptic fiction. Those are a lot of sort of what many people might consider disparate, different types of subgenres. What led you down the path to sci-fi? Let's start there first. What's your inspiration? Were you always sort of a sci-fi junkie? You said you like robots, but I don't know, what your reading interests were growing up that made you want to be a science fiction writer.
I didn't. Well, I grew up with sci-fi on screen mostly. Space 1999, Star Wars, of course. I like making stories with the toys. You have these little guys and you come up with a story in your head, and then I would tell my parents. I'd memorize it, and then I would tell them. And then when I got a bit older, I started reading. I didn't really read sci-fi. I didn't know I was not reading sci-fi, or if I was, or I grew up in French in Quebec City. We didn't have a lot of money, so when I got, I'd scrounge a quarter here and there, and eventually I'd have enough to maybe buy a book. So I'd go to the store. The only thing I could really afford was that table up front with the mass market paperbacks on sale. And that back in the day, that meant John le Carré, Robert Ludlum, Michael Crichton, who else? Clancy. Mm-hmm. And so I would just pick one that I thought looked interesting and I'd read it. And it never occurred to me that there was a real difference between a Michael Crichton novel and a Tom Clancy novel, because both of them made up stories. Like, none of it was true. And there was part of it was based on reality, and they had these characters and they went through adventures. And so it was a book, really. Never really cared for genres from the earliest stage I can remember. So I guess it translated when I started writing. It just put in stuff that I like.
It reminds me of what I do. I grew up reading a bunch of different genres too. If you look around my library here, I've got science fiction books, I've got fantasy books, I've got Robert Ludlum's books, I've got Tom Clancy, I've got Clive Cussler, I got Michael Crichton. So when I began writing, I didn't know what I wanted to write, so I have a tendency to glom a little bit of everything. And I noticed that from your writing, from reading, history of what comes next, is that similar to what Kirk was describing with Sleeping Giants. Is it Themis or Themis?
Oh, we had that discussion forever with my first editor. The book was originally titled that. And I say the Themis Files, and he said Themis, and he hated the fact that we had to argue about it. So it ended up being the series name, and we spent another grueling week figuring out the title for the book.
That's so fun. I remember having I was offended when Terry Brooks described his Shannara novels. He pronounces Shannara different than what it actually is, and I was like, "Ooh, yes, Terry Brooks, that's wrong. That's not how you pronounce Shannara. What are you talking about?" But anyway, so you're great at combining those different disparate elements. The political thriller, the apocalyptic elements, the science fiction. But in History of What Comes Next is you add the historical thriller. Yeah. And again, I all my stories sort of have a historical basis. A lot of the prologues begin somewhere in the past, and then I carry it to modern days. I told you basically why I do a hybrid, different genres. Is there any what drives you to create this mixture of this hybrid, this chimera of different genres, a little bit of everything tied in there? Was some impetus, or is it just something organic to the way your brain's wired?
Probably. I don't know. It just comes out that way. I can't really think of a story in a very sort of mono something everything in my mind sort of goes in a bunch of directions, and I couldn't picture myself writing a book that was like strictly one thing. Now that I'm aware that there are things and that they fall into different categories, I never really cared for boxes. I don't like boxes. So the history part was new though for me.
Which again, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But before I get into the history of What Comes Next. Can you just tell me what your typical writing day is like? What is your process in producing a book?
Well, they've pretty much all been different. So Sleeping Giants, couch, phone. Waking Gods, I had a book deal for it, but I had plenty of time. It was a year and a half before the first book came out. I still had a full-time job, so I wrote it on a computer. But again, every night, 500 words or so a night after my son went to bed. I started running out of juice fairly quickly. So by book 3, I was doing it pretty much full time. And then the world went to hell. So it's still what I'm doing all day, but I have to cut my day and like do it either shorter writing periods or sometimes like I'll spend half the day just doing research just to think about something else. I mean, I can't complain. I mean, I'm better off than most people. I don't live alone, but it's taken its toll, and it's slowing down the process a bit. But I manage. But I'm still adapting to this. Hopefully, it ends and I can go back to sort of a normal working schedule. But normally, I'd get up, walk my son to school, work from 8 till about 3:30. Sometimes 4, and then do something else. And sometimes I'd come back to it at night if I feel like it. I have very sort of, I set a minimum every day, but I keep it low so I don't feel, because the worst thing for me is you spend a whole day writing and you end up feeling like crap because you didn't do enough. So I set that bar as low as I can, and I'm usually happy when I end my day. So
it's good to have set your expectations within a reasonable parameter, and not try to shoot for the moon. So okay, let's jump into the new book, because that's what we're all here to talk about. Why don't you give me the elevator pitch thumbnails description of the story? Because I don't know, I can describe it, but I'm afraid that I will give something away I'm not supposed to give away yet.
Oh, well. It's the first of a series. So the series is about these really badass women who have been around for about 3,000 years. They're all genetically identical. And they've been messing with history in the hopes of taking us to the stars before some apocalyptic event kills us all. And this book follows Sarah and Mia, a mother and daughter. They're all mothers and daughters. The 99th generation of these women, as they get involved in the very early days of the space race. Again, trying to nudge us forward, upwards, a little faster than we would on our own. So they start by helping Wernher Von Braun, helping escape Germany so he could join the Americans. And then they move to Russia to start some sort of space race with the people that are available.
Perfect. because I would have told a lot less. So I'm glad you revealed some of the things that I wasn't going to reveal. So now I have a little more leeway in which to ask some questions. Just to backtrack a little bit about just the general writing itself, is, I describe this as sort of a literate science fiction. I write sort of a pulpy type of stuff. Yours, I mean, when I had no formal training in writing, all my writing came from reading books. I always recommend people that they should write every day and read every night, because you're going to learn things from the books you're reading to help your prose become stronger. And I could do that today. Whenever I have a book that I'm reading, if somebody does something unique and different that I've not seen done before, I'll jot a note about it. Like, that's really cool. I'm going to, maybe try to incorporate that in my next book. So when I was reading this story, I made many notes. So you do many sort of literary tricks that I hadn't seen before. So, I mean, it's just from a prose standpoint, it's brilliant. But what it's even more exciting is that it's besides, delving into the human condition with with Mia and Sarah and this arc of women through history, it's pretty incredibly exciting. There's some action-packed scenes, and that's a balancing act. It's hard to pull off, the depth of character along with writing such beautiful prose, yet still having a almost an action-paced pulpish type of storyline. Sometimes it's just some scenes when Mia's in Nazi Germany and she's cornered and she's going to be exposed. Your heart's pounding. How do you balance that? I mean, is that do you have a natural ear for that, or is it something that you outlined that you thought, okay, I'm going to this X number of exciting scenes, but I'm going to interlace everything? Do you pre-plan that, or is it some combination of both?
I outline everything. I'm a plotter. I'm a huge plotter, but I don't necessarily follow structures that they teach people in school. I don't have an MFA or anything, and I go by the feel of it, not the writing itself, just the structure. I look at my plot and I say, well, this needs a little bit of like a little pickup here, because I often will go the other route, and focus on sort of the internal conflicts of the characters, and so not so much the external plot, but how they're reacting to it. But once in a while, I like to just turn everything around and just punch it with some action scenes, which is weird. This book has, like, the format of this book sort of makes it a little easier. Sleeping Giants was hard because it was 100% dialogue. There was no inner monologue. It was just people talking to each other, and it makes action scenes a little difficult. So I had fewer with this. It's still not as straightforward as, say, a third person, but I had a lot more fun, let's say, writing the action scenes, because there's a lot more you can do if you can at least be in the character's head.
Along that lines, as questions come up about basically, the plotting. This is from a question from Susan. She says, "I love your Themis Files trilogy, and one of my favorite things is your boldness in which you killed off major characters. The jeopardy was so real for everyone. Can you talk about these choices? Do you know from the beginning who would survive? Was it hard to kill your darlings?"
Oh, it's hard. Yeah, but I knew half. She's talking about two characters, and I knew one of them had to die. With the other one, I struggled. I had I plotted the book twice. I had two routes that I could go, that I could choose. One meant we could learn more about this mysterious character. But if we learned more and he lost the mystery, then sorry. But yeah, it wasn't going to survive. The other one is we keep the mystery or even add more to it, and then I could keep him alive for a little longer. The reason I chose to kill that person is mostly a selfish one, because it forced me to do something different from that point on, because he was sort of important in the structure of the first two books, and then without these two characters were gone, I was left with, I had to do something new, and I like doing new stuff. So even if you read the whole series, you don't get three flavors of the same thing. You really get three different things with some thread that keeps it together.
So back to the history of what comes next is, again, I mentioned before, this is almost a historical thriller in many regards. And I'm personally fascinated with that chunk of history anyways. I've delved into the mystery surrounding the science and technology of Nazi Germany. One of my novels, in your previous novel, you had otherworldly dangers and giant robots. What was the impetus to turn to the past, to World War II, and to those post-war decades in which to set a science fiction story? What was the impetus to go to history for this book?
Well, I started with I got the characters first. I had this idea. I'd had it for a long time. I wanted characters who could exist at any time, pretty much throughout history. And then I was left with, I didn't know what to do with it, because you have two options. Either they're immortals, so vampires or someone who doesn't die, or something else is going on, and I didn't have that something else. And so I started reading about a bunch of different things, and I came across a paper about a fish in Texas that tricks males from another species that resembles it into mating with them. And then they pass on none of the genes from that male onto their offspring. So they're basically cloning themselves. All the fish are female, and from a certain standpoint, they're all the same fish. And I thought, this is amazing, because it's the best of both worlds. I could have my characters exist throughout history, and they would share some part of who they are because they're genetically identical. But at the same time, I wouldn't have to write the same person over and over again, because they're born at different times in different places. They have their own experiences, and they're like very unique individuals also in their own right. So once I had that, I was super happy. I wanted to write something. Didn't know where to start. I figured out their motivations, and it made a little more sense to talk about going to space if we had at least something that could go near space. So the 40s were a nice spot to start. Plus, I knew I could have flashbacks to previous generations, so I could have my cake and really eat it too. And the 40s are such just a fertile ground for discussing pretty much anything. Science is moving faster than it ever has. There's 60 million people died. It's the worst tragedy in history. At the same time, you have amazing people who risk their lives for something greater than themselves. You have incredibly evil people, and we think of the Nazis, but the people fighting the Nazis weren't that great either. Like if you look at Stalin and his entourage, and you have, through all this drama, you have millions of people who went through their regular lives. Like while Russia was falling apart and like 1/7 of the population was dying, someone had their first child, someone met someone got married. And so you have this sort of weird mixture of joy and suffering. I thought it was just perfect theater to explore a bunch of the themes I wanted to play with in that book.
Of course, when you take on that, you have the burden then of being accurate. The historical accuracy, getting the voice right, getting the details of that time period right. What was from personal experience, I know when I'm doing my historical part of the story, it's one of the hardest parts of writing it. It's trying to make sure everything's historically accurate, because heaven knows readers have a sharp eye, and they are very good at pointing out when you've not been accurate with maybe some detailed history, or even just like what type of buttons are on that uniform.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about your process for the researching, being that you went to, you challenged yourself with writing a historical thriller / science fiction book?
I expected it to be harder than it was, mostly, I guess, in part because I've done tons of research on all my books, but sometimes for like weird reasons. And I had to research things mostly, like where do you mine iridium? How much does it weigh? Where do you find some? What's a nice route to go to Syria? How do squirrels hide their nuts? So like a million weird things that just take forever to research, and sometimes you can't find anything because I'm weird. Like if I send my characters to a restaurant, it's a real place, and I read the reviews so that they order the right food. So because you don't want your characters to eat the bad food at the restaurant. And some of these things are like sound simple, but take like days just to get this insignificant piece of information. When I got to this, I thought this is going to be endless. Like I'll never finish that book. But it turns out there is so much more out there about the war and the space race. And in terms of the space race, like very early on, I found this amazing document in the NASA archives about the Russian space program that talks about everything from the technical aspects of the rockets that they're building to the personal lives of these people, how they get along. It was like a gold mine.
We'll always look for that perfect font of everything you want out of a novel.
Yeah.
And again, when I've done novels, sometimes it's the key is just you don't have to know everything about history. You just need to know the history for that day.
Yeah.
You just have to confine that to as narrow of a scope as you can. But you did a beautiful job. I mean, not just in regards to the historical detail. I think you captured the voice. It sounds like people living in that era. They don't sound like modern people, just dropped off into the middle of World War II with, modernism. You did a beautiful job with just the cadence and the vocabulary. I was quite amazed at how you pulled that off.
Thank you.
Let's talk about those characters who were speaking. You have Mia, you got her mother Sarah. There's two strong women who are, belong to the mysterious. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. The Kipsu. Kipsu. Thank you. That's what I guessed it would be that. And how was it? You create two strong female characters in a very male-dominated period of time. Basically, they're at the beginning. Mia's in the near the end of World War II, Nazi Germany, embedded in a group of very prejudiced men, and then later on, both of them are dealing with a scientific world that is not very friendly to women. Can you talk a little bit about the process of bringing that type of push and pull into your story?
Yeah. Again, another thing I thought would be harder. Because I knew a few things, it takes forever before, say, women are able to open a bank account on their own. It takes forever for them to be able to vote. It takes forever for a lot of things. But if you dig just below the surface, you find women who have broken through those barriers at every step, at every time in history, for just about everything. When I was researching for the Themis files, women aren't allowed in special ops unit, but back then they weren't. But if you dig deep enough, if they had a commander who thought they were really good, they'd send them to do the thing. They just called the mission something else. And so you had a bunch of women flying combat helicopters into combat before we think that they were. Same with, Sarah starts working, the book begins with Sarah working for the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, ancestor to the CIA. And there were lots of women working for them. There were lots of women spies. Julia Child, the chef, worked for the OSS. She helped create a shark repellent for the Navy. And everywhere you look, you find these amazing women who did things that no one thinks women were doing at the time. And so I thought I would have to come up with very convoluted excuses for Mia and Sarah to do the things they were doing, but they weren't the only ones doing them. So it was easier than I thought.
Well, I also appreciate the fact that you created a lot of drama. I mean, you didn't pull back from the fact, the prejudice and the misogyny that was occurring there. You didn't just have them sort of accepted. I mean, I like that part of the story too. This it just made the characters feel that much stronger to survive that level of misogyny that was going on during that period of time. But one other issue also raised in the story, and a story that's involved with a lot about the history of rocketry and early space travel, is about climate change. It's raised in this book. What was the impetus to fold that aspect of this into the story?
Well, it's on my mind, so I guess that's sort of the main reason why it's there. But also because we seem to forget that none of this is new. Like we've been talking about this. It was a popular scientific topic over 100 years ago, and so we keep rehashing the same things over and over again. But like, so when people disagree, say that carbon dioxide is helping heat up the planet because there's snow outside, but people were having that debate in 1876 or whatever, and so once it's one of those things when you start digging, you find so many interesting things that I thought, oh well, that goes in, and then suddenly you have this thread going on, and it made sense for these women's journey that they would be worried about the fate of the planet because, well, it's what they do for a living. Their entire existence is based on trying to save humanity, and so if we're about to die of something else anyway, they'd want to know. I learned so many cool things doing like researching.
And I learned a lot from reading your book. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know that, and I was just wondering, is he making that up or is that real? And I'm afraid to ask too much more about the Kipsu and the history and the tracker who's hunting them, lest I reveal too much. But since I just brought that up, let's skip to the end of the novel. Let's reveal the ending. No, basically to the end of the novel, you have an addendum where you do tell me then how much of it's real and how much is not and where it's coming from. And I do that with my own novels, and I enjoy sharing that with my readers. And oftentimes I get feedback from readers, and that's the best part of your novel is the what's true, what's not section you add at the end of your books. Yeah. And I found that with your book too. Not that I didn't love the rest of your book, but I found that last addendum really fascinating because it revealed how much what I thought you were making up was based on real events or real history. Can you talk a little bit about why you added that?
Well, I don't know. I felt I couldn't not to. I think it helps to look at the book in a totally different way once you know that pretty much all of it is true. And plus, I learned so many cool things. You can't not share. I just had to share, and I didn't want to do it just as a bibliography thing. Like, if you're interested, go read all these books. That no one does it. I mean, my favorite bibliography at the end of a novel is Crichton's in the Andromeda Strain because it's all fake. But so I thought, let me just tell people a bunch of cool stuff that I learned while doing this thing. And I had a great time writing it. And I get good feedback about it. Oddly enough, when they did the audiobook, it's a multicast recording. Super cool. One voice per character. Some of those things there's a lot of there are raw scenes in the written book. Like, I didn't hold back. I wanted to show things that were ugly in their ugliness. But in the audiobook, some of these scenes are like, just, whoa, that's a little too much. It's intense. It's very intense. Anyway, they asked me to read that. So for those who are going to listen to the book instead of reading it, when you get to that part that we're talking about, it's me talking.
That's cool.
No.
No, I couldn't have done that. I had to do a little bit of audio once for one of my books. I can't remember what it was for, and it was I think it was for NPR, and they wanted me to read a section that they can air. And I remember, like, every other word they'd stop me. No, emphasize that heavier. No, speak softer. It's like, oh my God, how does anybody actually do this for a living? I was like sweating bullets the entire time.
It was super fun. I hate listening to my voice. So when I listen to the audiobook, I skip that part because I can't deal with it. But
well, at least they included it. I know some of my audio version of the book that they didn't even include the what's true, what's not section in the audio, which I didn't.
Oh, they added stuff that I didn't have in the book. They put in an interview between the voice actors who do Mia and Sarah, who happen to be real life mother and daughter.
Oh, really?
That was so cool.
That is cool. Well, since we reached the end of the novel, what's coming next? What's next? Have you already written? Are you in process of? What can we look forward to in the continuation of this storyline?
There are 3 books. It's a trilogy. I'm working on book 3 right now, but I'm not really done with book 2. Like we finished books about 1 million times, but right now I'm actually working on book 3. And each book follows a different generation of the Kipsu. So Sarah and Mia are the 99th generation. In the second book, Mia is the mother of the 100th generation, and so on until the third book. And you can look forward to better music because the book is soundtracked. I put every chapter title is a song title, and there's a playlist on Spotify and Apple Music that you can listen to. I wrote the chapters while listening to their song in particular. Sometimes it will show in the chapter structure and whatnot. But this is I discovered as many great songs as I think I could from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But I was really happy to get to book 2, which begins in 1968. It was a lot easier.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier getting to the modern time where you can you don't have to make up as much or look up as much details.
In terms of music, anyway, the music in 68 was a hell of a lot better. Yeah,
that's true. Again, I was going to ask this question anyways, but I prefaced my question here that says, everybody's going to ask this at some point during the Q&A, so I'll jump the gun. But actually, they beat me already. Is there any movement in Hollywood for a Themis Files movie? You want to, again, we've talked before about Sony and the...
Yeah, so originally, this was bought by Sony Pictures, then that option ran out. That went to Sony TV, and that option ran out. Now it's somewhere else. I can't really talk about it. There is movement. I don't know how much. I don't exactly know what movement, but it's moving. And there is a lot of movement on the test, the novella that I have with Tor.com.
Talk about that a little bit, about the test.
So it's a novella about a man taking the British citizenship test. It's called the Life in the UK test. So he goes for his citizenship test so that his family can stay in the UK. And then things go horribly wrong. I won't go into details, but that was optioned as well. It's with E1. And right now, there's a project directed by Gavin Hood, who did Ender's Game, who would direct and also wrote the script. And it would star Payman Mahdi and John Boyega of Star Wars fame in the lead roles. And so I'm waiting on other news on that front.
I hope that happens. I would love to see that.
But it's really it's difficult to know what's going on because Hollywood is already strange to begin with, but pandemic Hollywood is another level of I have no idea what's happening.
Similar along, Jane asked a question in the Q&A about film interest in history, what comes next. She says that she's riveted by the action scenes and entranced by the character of Mia. Seems like this would translate well to a TV series. Is there any pickup along that line with history of...
There's nothing signed at the moment. Oh. But yeah, I could see that as a TV show too.
Let's see. Kurt also asks, I love occasions when my favorite authors drop characters into each other's work. For example, James, you and Steve Barry, we've mixed up our characters in our books. Can you foresee some sort of collaboration with Sylvain? Could imagine some great tech and sci-fi synergy is possible. Read both of your stuff. Big fanboy. Well, thanks, Kurt. Appreciate it.
You could hire Rose from the Themis Files into Sigma Force. She'd be good.
I think
she would save the world twice.
Now, I've had in my book Sandstorm, I had a line of parthenogenic women that traced their line to the Queen of Sheba. So there must be a way I can somehow sneak I'll have to figure that one out. So we're running a little bit out of time. Anybody else have any final questions? Please jump in. I love when people ask me this, and I'm going to ask this to you, is for those writers out there, do you have any advice and pearls of wisdom about the craft, about the process, about getting published?
I have a question.
Sure.
You also have a book coming soon. Can you tell us about it?
Again, I generally do 2 books a year. And so my next Sigma book, Kingdom of Bones, is coming out next August. Next January will be my return to my fantasy roots. Back when I was writing for Del Rey, I did a fantasy series. I did also a fantasy series for Penguin. Now I'm starting a new book with Tor. It's called The Starless Crown. It's coming out in January, and that's all I'm going to say, because some of the details I'm not ready to reveal yet. So that's that. So again, back any pearls of wisdom from you about writing, about the craft, about publishing?
Oh God, I hate giving advice. I think it's horrible. In terms of publishing, the only advice that I keep giving people is write the book and keep working on it until you're happy with it. And by happy, I mean it in a different sense than most people mean it. I mean, if you, after that, show it to 50 people in the industry and they all tell you they hate it, will you still like the book? And if the answer is yes, then you're good. Because I think that's what you need to do. You need to write something that it won't really matter what other people will say about it afterwards. You need to be so happy and proud of it, then it's all fine.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think half the game of getting published is just perseverance. If you had stopped, at 43 in your rejection and just said, okay, forget it. Clearly, it's not worth bothering with. We would not, have the Themis Files. We wouldn't have the history of what comes next. So again, I always tell people write from a place of passion, so that you believe in your work, and then just don't take no for an answer. Just keep plugging away at it. So I think we're just around at the 50-minute mark. If there's any last questions, so we can jump in there, please do. Otherwise, I think we're winding down. See if anything else had any questions. Just give me a few more moments. 10, 9, 8. Did
we do
7,
the ask
6.
a question, the 4 that are in the ask a question at the bottom?
Yes. Yeah, I've asked. Those are the questions about
because I can't see them.
I read them for you. My glasses still work. I can't see them this way, but I can see them this way. All right. So I think we're just about at the 50-minute mark. So I think we're ready to sign off. Maggie, I don't know if you're in the wings. If you want to come in with some final words, please do so. There she is.
Hi, everyone. That's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you again to our guests and to everyone who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate everyone's time and your support of independent bookstores. To purchase the book tonight, please click on the green rectangular button at the bottom of the screen that says A History of What Comes Next. We're also accepting donations on our website. If you'd like regular updates on upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Booksu. Thank you, James, again. That was great.
Happy to do so.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.